Welcome everyone. This is a special day. We're here at Frank's Landing with Will Frank, and we're here at his family place, and please thank you for being here, and please feel free to tell us what we need to know to be here.
Thank you very much. Here we are today, October 19th, and we're here at Frank's Landing, right along the beautiful Nisqually River today. We have our silver salmon running right now in the river. Behind us we have a couple of our elders who are still fishing here on the Nisqually River. This area is very special to me as you know, a Nisqually tribal member, but also a member of the Frank's Landing Indian community. My name is Willie Frank III. I'm the son of Willie Frank Jr. I'm also a Nisqually Tribal Councilman. A lot of the rich history here needs to be told, needs to be taught, and we got to make sure that people understand, you know, who we are as Native people here in the state of Washington. You know, my father and many others were arrested over 50 times fishing here on the Nisqually River throughout the 1960s and the 1970s. This area here at Frank's Landing was the centerpiece to the fish wars that happened back in the 60s. At the time, the state of Washington felt like our Native people, not just Nisqually people, but our Native people throughout the state of Washington shouldn't have the right to fish on their usual and accustomed grounds. And of course, my father and many others, you know, the way we understand it is we have a treaty with the United States government. The Treaty of Medicine Creek was signed in 1854, and it gave us the right to fish, hunt, and gather on our usual and accustomed grounds. And I was always raised, this is our usual and accustomed grounds here on the Nisqually River. We are not technically on the reservation. We're about 10 miles south of the Nisqually Indian Reservation boundary lines. You know, our people never knew boundary lines. We didn't have lines that existed to tell us to where we can be and where we can't be. When the fish are running, we get on the river and we catch them. You know, and today it's the same way today. You know, unfortunately, our salmon runs and our salmon stocks are not coming back to what they used to be. Our salmon are not returning home. We're really in a dire strait right now here on the Nisqually. I fish right here, right behind us here with my brother. And we've fished in this area literally for the last almost 200 years. And you could consider my grandfather, Willie Frank Sr., who lived to be 104 years old, and my father. And at 82 years old, my father, he was still fishing here on the Nisqually River with us. And you know, seeing him at 82 still want to come down and get in the boat and fish, you know, it meant a lot to me for my outlook of who we are as Native people. You know, we are stewards of the land. We're the protectors of the land. You know, we're not going to do anything that harms our species in the river. We're not going to do anything to kill off our salmon runs. You know, I hear that a lot from outside organizations, from sports fishermen groups, and you know, different commercial fishing groups that are non-tribal. You know, and the tribes always seem to end up getting the blame for why there's no salmon in the state of Washington, the Pacific Ocean up here in the Pacific Northwest, and that's completely the opposite of how we are as Native people. You know, we're gonna never do anything to catch the last salmon. And I always tell people, I don't want to be that generation that catches the last salmon. I don't want to be that generation that has to take my kids someday to a museum to hold a stuffed salmon, or to see a stuffed salmon on the wall. You know, we can't survive off making money off of fishing anymore as Native people either. So, you know, for us, it's more or less of being able to get that net in the water and exercise our treaty rights. You know, I was always taught that if you're not exercising your treaty rights, they're going to keep trying to take them away. And we continue to battle over the years here in 2020. You know, it's tough out there when you think about it. I mean, you're taking away something that has been near and dear to our heart for thousands of years, being able to fish here on this spot. You know, I don't think people understand that. I don't think people understand how the salmon ties into us as Native people and as Nisqually people. You know, the salmon for us, that is our way of life. And I always compare it to folks when they're talking about how important church is and how important their religion is. Well, for us, being on this river, that's our church. You know, I always tell people on Sundays when the king salmon are running, you know, and we're able to be on here, you know, it feels like that is us going to church on Sundays, my brother and I. It's something we get to share. We get to share that with my dad still. You know, in 2014 he passed away, but here in 2020, for us being on the river is something that we all shared together that was very near and dear to our heart. And so, you know, it's important that people do understand that. I feel like with all the racial tension going on right now in the world, you know, I guess not even the world, I guess I could say the United States, you know, it's important that folks understand who Nisqually is and who our native people are throughout the Pacific Northwest. So the work here on the Nisqually River, it never stops. You know, here at Frank's Landing, you know, we're always doing what we can as tribal council and as tribal leadership to make sure that we are protecting from the summit to the sea. You know, the river runs 80 miles from the Puget Sound all the way to the base of Mount Rainier. You know, and here on the Nisqually, our goal is always to try to buy up property along the Nisqually River so we can protect it. So we can make sure that there's no big housing developments going in, or there's any kind of infrastructure that's going to be built that's going to affect our salmon runs, affect the habitat, affect the river, the rain runoff. You know, we're trying to look at every possibility, every angle to make sure that we protect this. And the change that we're seeing here on the Nisqually River in the last 20 years, from the lack of our fishing seasons, whether it's our Chinook, our coho, or our chum season, you know, it scares me as a tribal leader, but also more important as a Nisqually tribal member. You know, to be able to teach that next generation about setting your net, the importance of setting your net, and all the things that come into being a fisherman here on the Nisqually River. You know, I think it's important that we make sure that, you know, the next generation of people understand how sacred and important this river is to us. And as I said earlier, you know, you talk about always hearing about the Indians catching every last fish and you know, being the ones who are greedy. You know, that's far from the truth. You know, we have 2 hatcheries here on the Nisqually River that produce a great amount of Chinook salmon for not just us as Nisqually, but for other tribes, for sports fishermen, for commercial fishermen that go out into the Puget Sound. You know, and I fully believe that if it wasn't for some of our tribal hatcheries, we wouldn't have any fishing, whether it's state, tribes, you know, commercial, sports, whatever it is. You know, if it wasn't for the work that our tribes do here on the Nisqually, but throughout Western Washington, you know, we would be in a lot of trouble. You know, and so I'm always trying to encourage that next generation to go to school, to become biologists, to become engineers, to be able to come back and give back to this area. You know, I was always taught that we can't do this on our own as Nisqually people. You know, and having my father, Willie Frank III, he was the greatest, I guess you could say, motivator and also team player. You know, he understood that it can't be just the tribes, it can't be just the state, or it can't be just the feds who are making sure that our rivers and our streams are protected. It has to be all of us here in the state of Washington. You know, we're all Washingtonians at the end of the day here. And it's our job to protect this river. It's our job to be the voice of the salmon and everything that lives here. You know, so I would definitely encourage the next generation to you know, find something that you can create and put your whole life into. If you're able to do that and come back, you know, whether you're working up all the way up Lummi by Bellingham or down here at Nisqually, you know, find something that motivates you, that you can come do every day, and give back and protect the resources that we have. I mean, this is paradise. You know, my grandfather, he always talked about how Nisqually Indians lived in paradise before the white man came. You know, and I think about that all the time. You know, when we are down here fishing, you know, we are down here exercising our treaty rights. That's when I always realize that I feel the most grounded and, you know, always feeling good about things. But then again, when we're not catching any fish to give to our elders, to freeze, to smoke, to be able to distribute out to the community, that's tough to see also. So we have a long road ahead of us to make sure that we're protecting the environment and the salmon for the next 50 years.
Hi, I'm Sheila Wilson. I work for the Nisqually River Foundation. We're a nonprofit, and we're the home of the Nisqually River Council, Nisqually Stream Stewards, and the Nisqually River Education Project. And I have the great pleasure of running the education project. And we get to involve students from throughout the watershed to do water testing, tree planting, salmon carcass tossing, wildlife surveys, and field investigations on the beaches of Puget Sound, as well as teacher trainings to help give teachers the curriculum and the resources they need to do all these things with students. Yeah, so here we are today at Red Salmon Creek, and this is a tributary of the Nisqually, and it is a salmon-bearing creek. The chum run is still very strong in here, as well as the coho, and it does feed the riparian forest. You can see this is a relatively healthy example of a riparian zone. We've got some multi-age different alders, cedars. I'm seeing some Indian plum and a little bit of understory. So this is pretty good salmon habitat, great spawning gravel. And then we're also going to go up the hill and look at a restoration site, because this area was a farm. So the forest was cleared to make room for cattle and a garden for the family. And now we're just going to look at how we've been restoring it back to native forest. And so then we came in and planted thousands of plants in here, about 15 different native species. And it's a really great thing to witness how much things can change in even just a decade. So the mission of the Nisqually River Education Project is to connect students learning in the classroom to real-life service learning opportunities in their home watershed. So that looks like inspiring stewardship for the next generation, not just for the watershed, but really for the whole world, in a way that lets them act on what they've learned to make a positive impact. And that's not something kids get every day. They get a lot of sit and listen and read and write and learning about problems, but not that many opportunities to actually get on the ground and implement solutions. So if you can imagine 50 to 100 students, anywhere from 3rd grade through high school or college, coming out here, we make a gigantic circle, we review with them the lessons they've already had prior to the field trip about why we're doing what we're doing and why it's important. And then we teach them how to plant a tree. We've got a great video on that. And we teach them about how to use a shovel. So it really is interesting to see how some students, not to name names, but kids from Eatonville, kids from Graham, they really know how to dig, they know what they're doing. Kids that come from Lacey or DuPont, more in the suburban environment, they really don't know how to dig a hole or plant a tree. Some kids, of course, have some gardening experiences, but very few kids have actually come out and planted trees like this. So it's fantastic to see them grab onto an opportunity. It's fantastic to see the teachers react to these students, because we'll undoubtedly have a teacher say, look at so-and-so. He's already planted 10 trees. These other kids have barely finished their first one. And I'm just so glad to see this kid is able to be productive and do something good, because I can't get him to do anything in the classroom. And that is the kind of comment that makes my day, because kids need a chance to be kids. They need to be in their bodies, they need to be moving. And in offering this movement in a positive direction is really a win-win for everybody. So another thing that's fantastic about the work that I get to do is seeing how much things can change in such a short amount of time. I guess when you get older, time seems to go faster. But this planting here was just from 2008, so it's practically a self-sustaining forest at this point. And you can see some of the key species we've planted include this blue spruce. We've got some short pine, and also looking at some Oregon ash. There is a person that we work in partnership with the wildlife refuge who designed these plantings. They have to analyze the lay of the land, the aspect, where the slopes are, how the soils are, how it drains, and then determine what would have been here before it was cleared, and do their best to replicate that. And I thought one really interesting piece of that story was the spruce, because when they were looking for historical forests in the area, it's pretty hard to find something that's been untouched. And where they could find trees, they didn't find any spruce, although historical records were written that there were spruce in this area. With more research and more digging, he discovered that most of the old spruce in our area were harvested to make airplanes out of. So he went ahead and included those, even though they weren't in his reference forests. And as you can see, they're one of the species that's actually thriving the most. In addition to these conifers like the spruce and the shore pine and the Douglas fir, there's also deciduous trees. On this particular site, there are quite a few Oregon ash. There's also some alder and some cottonwood. And then there's a really wide selection of understory plants, including snowberry, currant, thimbleberry, and salmonberry. And all of these native plants generally don't need human assistance once they get established. So this site did have some pretty poor survival at the beginning, and they did bring up some large drums of water, which were then used to water the site by volunteers. But because of the scale of the work that's happening out here, watering is not really a feasible option for most sites. So more often than not, they will come back and replant instead of trying to continue to water and tend the plants. Another thing they can do to give the plants a leg up is to install plant protectors. And this is hard one to see, but these plastic tubes go all the way down snug to the ground, and that prevents rodents. Rodents are generally considered the biggest threats to young plants because in the winter, after all the grasses have died away, they are still looking for nutrition, and they find it in the barks of trees. And if they get the bark girdled the tree all the way around the tree, it will kill it. So they try to keep the rodents out with that, and it also does help cut back on how much the deer and elk will browse the plants as well. Another maintenance thing to consider when you're planning a restoration site is the invasive weeds. So all of this area here is really thick with a reed canary grass, which was a pasture grass introduced because of its ability to withstand a wide variety of conditions, even wet, soggy conditions. So it's great if you're a farmer, but really a mess if you're trying to restore native plants because it really bullies the other plants. And they do have some money that they can pay people to do weed eating, and the protective tubes help with that too, so you can get nice and close to the plant without hurting it with the weed eater. And in some cases still, they're using herbicides like Roundup, but they're trying to get away from that because obviously this is a sensitive area near salmon streams, so we don't want to be applying a bunch of chemicals. But when you're dealing on this scale, sometimes you have to choose your battles. So we really count on our community to make this magic happen out here in the Nisqually. Over the years, with the thousands and thousands of trees that have been planted over literally thousands of acres, it really is a community effort, and everyone is welcome. We love to have people nearby and people from far away all come and take part in it. It's a day you won't forget. We keep it simple and easy, and it's really a good feeling to get out there and do something physical, especially during this year in particular when we're all so isolated and on our own. Getting out there and remembering that there are ways to be socially engaged and socially distanced while you're having a really positive impact in the world. We welcome you to come out and join us and be in touch if you have any questions.
We're out here. This is the main stem of the Nisqually River. A couple river miles before it reaches the lower Salish Sea. And right now, the wind is blowing across the water, but the river is not moving otherwise. The current is very slow. The high tide is pushing the river, the salt water is pushing the fresh water upstream, and some people might call this the equilibrium, the tidal equilibrium. The disturbance patterns we're seeing to the left are caused by some of that, the wind blowing across, a little bit of flow, but otherwise the river is even almost flowing a little bit upstream. And that's the tides pushing in with a little bit of salt marsh or saltwater influence. But I was just thinking, I don't see many salt marshes right now, but I do look across to the other side and see a few salt marsh plants, the plants that are adapted to salt water. Out here on the wind is quite strong, so I hope you can hear me over its roar. I'm looking down from the top of this human constructed dike that's keeping out the salt water, and I'm looking down at a salt marsh. So looking at the cross section that we discussed in class last week, you may not see this film for a few weeks, but there is the mud flat along the transect, and then some salt, a little bit of saltgrass, Disticulus spiccatum, with the pickleweed, which is this Salicornia virginiana, and this is an area that gets inundated every day. Very high salt tolerance in these plants. And looking out at the boardwalk that will take you out to the mouth of the river, and I'm looking out at the hillsides that are bordering, and this is Medicine Creek. So these hillsides are glacially carved, glacial drumlins that now form the valley walls. And this Medicine Creek is actually originating from a spring just a little bit upstream, and it is not part of the river, but probably it is part of the watershed. It's just an area. This is where the epicenter of the Nisqually quake was in 2001, and it damaged a part of this refuge, for at least blocked the ability to walk, and it also snapped and killed the treaty tree. Out just ahead of me was a Douglas fir. That's the tree where the Medicine Creek Treaty was signed back in 1855, and Will Frank III brought that up this morning. And so this is fresh water that comes out, it's meeting the salt water, and having the dikes taken out at the mouth have allowed more salt water to come in across laterally and meet with this body of water. It's a beautiful fall evening. Sun's getting ready to set, and here we are. It's a kingfisher hunting from these shrubs that are persisting 11 years in all this. And down below, if you look down into the water, I think you'll be able to see what I see. Yeah, there you can see the mud flat. You can see the detritus that's come in this tide, plus a little bit of saltgrass down there, saltgrass and pickleweed. But the seaweed and the frothing and foaming diatoms, probably some dead ones that are just washing in every day, twice a day, depositing, bringing nutrients in, a really big productive garden. And all of these herons and others out here as the tide comes in, and here's the kingfisher hunting. You can see it perched, just making its plunge. Things have quieted down here and the tide's washing in dinner, and just wanted to share this moment with you. Aren't as many people out here now, and still hear the traffic, but hear the water and the wind.